Basketball. A beautiful game played with two baskets that are 10 feet high, separated by a 94 by 50 feet parquet floor. On a cold December winter day in 1891 at Springfield College, the game was created by Dr. James Naismith, who was an instructor of a gymnasium class at the college. He was originally tasked to come up with an indoor recreational game for a group of students who had pent-up energy from having to stay indoors during the freezing weather. After many tries, Naismith eventually found inspiration from a game he used to play as a kid that involved throwing rocks. He asked a janitor to bring 2 boxes to use as goals, but that janitor came back with 2 peach baskets instead. Naismith nailed the peach baskets to lower balconies inside of the gym that just so happened to be exactly 10 feet off the ground. Naismith came up with 13 original rules, a referee was appointed, the bottoms of the peach baskets fell out after a few years, and just like that, the game of basketball was made, and started to spread like wildfire. The 13 original rules were printed in a college magazine that was mailed out to YMCAs across the country, and from there, the fierce, passionate love and popularity of the game started to manifest. Fast forward to 1949, the Basketball Association of America absorbed the National Basketball League to form one singular professional basketball league, and they rebranded as the National Basketball Association. Since then, the NBA has displayed some of the greatest players of all time, accomplishing and reaching heights, literally, that few have ever reached. They've come in all shapes and sizes across all positions, from point guard to the center. Basketball is a simple yet complicated game that has had constants as much as it's had fluidity and evolution. One of those constants is that size has always been an advantage, and some of the game's most dominant players have come from the center position. For decades, these big men instilled fear, intimidation, and a sense of helplessness into opposing teams thanks to their power, size, skill, and strength around the basket, on offense and defense. At the same time, those titans also carried the hopes of entire fan bases, hoping to see their team hoist the championship. But as time went on, and the game got faster, more spaced out, more guard and wing oriented, and power forwards evolved into some of the most versatile players the game has seen, many thought the true franchise center was considered dead. But what if I told you, the big man never really died? First true dominant big man in the NBA was George Mikan, a 6'10", 245-pound towering human. Mikan won 2 NBL championships and a BAA championship with the Minneapolis Lakers before the NBA formed in the 1949-50 season. And from there, Mikan led the Lakers to 4 of the NBA's first 5 championships, including the first documented three-peat. When the sun set on Mikan's career in 1956, Bill Russell was drafted by the Boston Celtics later that year, and we know the story. He won 11 championships in 13 years, including 2 as a player-coach, thanks to his dominance on defense, and he already became one of the greatest players of all time, and is unanimously considered the greatest winner the sport has ever seen. Russell's only rival at the time was Wilt Chamberlain, a 7'1", 275-pound marvel, who was drafted in 1959 by the Philadelphia Warriors. He was a track and field star and was praised for his all-around athleticism, and he used those gifts to constantly crush his usually smaller competition. Wilt was dominant at scoring, rebounding, and blocking shots. Even though the NBA didn't track blocks back then, he still holds NBA scoring and rebounding records that will never be touched. He led the league in assists one year just to simply prove to his doubters that he could pass to his teammates. He was so dominant that the NBA literally changed the rules to make it tougher for Wilt. Though honestly, those changes didn't really matter. Wilt only won 2 championships, and the only person that prevented him from winning more was Bill Russell. Russell was 7-1 against Wilt in playoff series, including 2-0 in the only two NBA Finals series where they played against each other. Wilt's only playoff series win against Russell was in 1967 in the East Division Finals between the Philadelphia 76ers and Russell's Celtics, and Wilt went on to win his first championship that year. His other championship happened in 1972, 3 years after Bill Russell's retirement. Russell and Wilt had titanic battles throughout the late 50s and 60s. Russell won 5 MVPs during his reign, and Wilt won 4. Each one had a run of 3 straight MVPs, a feat that's only been done by one other player in NBA history. To this day, people still argue over which player is better. While those two had mythological battles during the 60s, that same decade saw more of the NBA's biggest and greatest players enter the league, with guys like Nate Thurmond and Willis Reed. But the 1969 draft produced not just the greatest center ever, but a consensus top 3 player of all time, Ferdinand Louis Alcindor Jr., who we would all later know as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, aka the Captain. Kareem put himself on the map well before the NBA. He won 3 straight New York City Catholic high school championships, and in college, he won 3 straight NCAA championships with the UCLA Bruins and legendary coach John Wooden. In the 1967-68 season, college basketball banned the act of dunking a basketball because of this man. They called it the Lou Alcindor rule, and it lasted for 10 years. But that rule had an unintended side effect because not being allowed to dunk led Kareem to developing basketball's most unstoppable shot, the sky hook, an iconic shot that has yet to be replicated to this day and will probably never be replicated. A shot that is full of terror and finesse at the same time. A shot that was virtually unblockable because of Kareem's massive size. A shot that was Kareem's greatest weapon en route to scoring 38,387 points and becoming the NBA's all-time leading scorer, a position he still holds nearly 40 years later, until LeBron breaks the record this upcoming year. Kareem's consistent dominance spanned 2 full decades. In the 70s, Kareem won Rookie of the Year, a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks in his second season, and he won 5 total MVPs in that decade. In the 80s, his dominance continued, winning another MVP and 5 more championships as a part of the 1-2 punch with Magic Johnson and the Showtime Lakers, capping off a career that spanned 20 seasons, retiring at the age of 41. While Kareem was just getting started in the league, the 70s produced more of the game's true giants. Bill Walton was drafted by the Portland Trail Blazers in 1974 and gave us one of the shortest but greatest peaks ever. Walton led the Trailblazers to its only championship in 1977. Then he followed up that championship with a dominant 1977-78 season, where he led the Blazers to a 50-10 record before he unfortunately suffered a broken foot. He still won the MVP award that season, but that injury would linger throughout Walton's career and rob basketball fans of seeing a greater career from the Hall of Famer. Still, Walton left his imprint on the game, as he was considered to be the NBA's greatest passing center of all time. During the 70s, centers like Bob Lanier, Bob McAdoo, who you could argue was the early prototype for a jump-shooting big man, and the Chief, Robert Parrish, were all drafted in that decade. In the 1975-76 season, the NBA and another pro sports league, the American Basketball Association, merged together, and 4 ABA teams were brought over to the NBA. That brought in an influx of even more unique and talented titans like Artis Gilmore, Spencer Haywood, and Moses Malone, who won 3 league MVPs and a championship with the Philadelphia 76ers. While Magic and Larry Bird were busy saving the NBA in the 1980s, Kareem discovered his aforementioned second prime with the Lakers, and Robert Parrish was an established key cog in forming one of the greatest front courts ever in Boston. The decade was ruled by those 2 teams, sprinkled with a few finals appearances and a championship by some great 76er teams led by Moses. Under the bedrock of championships won by those teams in the 80s, the NBA drafts from 1984 to 1987 planted the seeds for a center renaissance that would be a big, pun intended, side story to Michael Jordan's reign for most of the 90s. The 84 through 87 drafts churned out 3 guaranteed Hall of Famers alone in Akeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, and David Robinson. Brad Daugherty is often forgot about, but he was the first overall pick in the 1986 draft and was a 5-time All-Star on some really good early 90s Cleveland Cavalier teams before a back injury at 28 years old caused him to retire early. For most of the 90s, Ewing, Robinson, and Olajuwon carried their respective franchises on their shoulders. During the 90s, the basketball gods gave us a few more Titans to roam the realm of the Giants. The 4th pick of the 1991 draft, Dikembe Mutombo, became an All-Star in his rookie year, and a few more times throughout the 90s, eventually becoming one of the greatest defensive centers ever, winning the Defensive Player of the Year award 4 times. The very next draft gave us maybe the most dominant player ever, Shaq. Then under Shaq's oversized shadow was an undersized center, Alonzo Mourning, who became a multi-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner and a Hall of Famer. During the 90s, these centers were mainstays in the top 10 for blocks and rebounds per game every season. The Shaqs, Ewings, Olajuwons, and Robinsons of the world were there too, but were also top 10 in scoring every season. With most of these bigs in their prime, or young in Shaq's case, there was some serious hand-to-hand combat down on the low block during the 90s. Olajuwon emerged from that decade reigning supreme, winning 2 championships during the 2 years MJ was retired. He beat Ewing in the 1994 finals, which went the full 7 games, and then he cleaned out young Shaq and the Orlando Magic in 5 during the 1995 finals. As the centers from the 84 through 87 draft started to get older and phase out at the end of the 90s, that's when Shaq hit his physical prime with the Los Angeles Lakers. The combination of rule changes to how defenses could play zone and more guards and skilled power forwards starting to flood the league, Shaq took the torch and displayed one of the greatest stretches of dominance the game has ever seen from 1999 to 2002. Winning 3 straight championships, 3 finals MVPs, and an MVP. If there was a proxy for what Wilt Chamberlain would look like if he played in later eras, it would be Shaq. Teams would have to carry an extra backup big man on their roster simply so they could have enough fouls when game planning for Shaq. By that time, Shaq was the last true 7-foot center to be top 10 in scoring, rebounding, and blocks. An older but still dominant Shaq won his last title with the Miami Heat in 2006 as the second banana to Dwayne Wade. By that point, the league started to get faster and more perimeter-oriented. Guard and wing play started to take a stranglehold on the NBA, along with the boon of skilled and dominant power forwards in the 2000s from KG to Tim Duncan to Dirk, C-Webb, Amari Stoudemire, among many others. Coaches at the younger level slowly stopped teaching the basics of the low block, and the center position started to become more of a prop to supplement the perimeter play. They started to devolve, as they were asked to either rebound, run the floor, roll to the rim in a pick and roll, or strictly be a defensive specialist or a stopgap. The true franchise center that can shoulder an entire organization's hopes on offense and defense started to erode. Some centers left a thread of hope that this wasn't the case. Yao Ming was drafted in 2002 by the Houston Rockets and was an all-star center with great touch around the basket and out to 18 feet. But a broken foot in the 2009 playoff series against the Lakers cut Yao's career short before hitting age 30. Andrew Bogut and Andrew Bynum were drafted in 2005, and they displayed great flashes, but a gruesome elbow injury to Bogut curtailed his career arc. Bynum was a cog for the Lakers, winning back-to-back titles in 2009 and 2010. He even made the All-Star team in 2012. At the risk of bringing back awful memories for myself, the 76ers made a big swing trading for Bynum later that summer, but a knee injury prevented him from playing a single game for the Sixers, and he was out of the league by age 26. Greg Oden was drafted with the first overall pick by the Portland Trail Blazers in 2007, and Oden gave old school fans hope that there were still true dominant centers left that can transform a franchise on both ends of the court. Oden completely dominated the country during his freshman year of college at Ohio State, and many thought he was the best player coming into the 07 draft over Kevin Durant. If you preferred Durant over Oden in the draft at the time, it was considered an unpopular opinion that 15-year-old me definitely held in high school. Unfortunately, Oden missed his entire rookie season with microfracture surgery in his knee, and he only played 82 games total for the Trailblazers over the course of his second and third seasons, and then missed the next 3 seasons with more knee issues. He was out of the league by 2014, having only played 105 career games. The only true dominant center we could point to during the post-prime Shaq era was Dwight Howard. Dwight held the best center in basketball title for at least a good 7 seasons. Howard was one of the best defenders in NBA history, being the only player to win the Defensive Player of the Year award 3 straight seasons in a row. And he was elite offensively, though not in the way you think. Many lamented Dwight for quote-unquote never reaching his potential because they saw the physical stature and believed he could be a true throwback back to the basket center. I never bought into that, but many others, including Dwight himself, thought he was that, even though he really only had 2 post moves max. I believe he never fully leaned into being a constant pick and roll to the rim big, with the Magic's innovative 4-out, 1-in system that was so effective. He was absolutely elite at it, constantly ranking in the 95th percentile in points per 100 possessions as the roll man from 2007 to 2012, but it was never a frequent part of his game. He never reached 10% in any season with the Magic. Dwight insisted he was a post-up center, posting up on more than 50% of his possessions during his prime years with Orlando, even though that was never really his forte. Regardless of that, Dwight was a top 5 player in the league during an era that had LeBron, Carmelo, Kobe, Dwayne Wade, etc., etc. He led the Magic to an NBA Finals appearance against the Lakers in 2010 as the best player on a contender, and the next season, he finished second in MVP voting. While Dwight had a rough patch in his career, he has been able to stay in the league by accepting a role off the bench. As an aside, if we could stop the music for a second, it's an absolute fucking joke that Dwight Howard wasn't named to the NBA's top 75 list last year. Anyway, at the onset of the 2010 decade, the center position, the true big man, was considered dead, deceased, extinct. It was so dead that the NBA actually removed the center position from the All-Star voting ballot prior to the 2012-13 season. To this day, you're only able to vote for a player for a backcourt or a frontcourt position on the All-Star ballot. But while everyone was writing their obituaries about the center position, a rebirth was actually brewing right under our noses. Players like Kevin Durant, KG, Dirk, LeBron, basically any player with size and perimeter skills, gave templates for youngsters with towering size in the high school and AAU circuits. They had belief that they could add anything to their skill package. As recent as the early 2000s, high school coaches have deterred the tallest guys on the team from dabbling into the dark arts of the guard skills. You had to get your ass in the post, as my high school coach put it to me when I played. But now more than ever, those guard skills are a necessity in today's NBA. The center position was never dead. The position just needed more time to catch up to an ever-evolving game. Now, as we sit and watch this upcoming season, we have big men in their prime that have reshaped the calculus of the NBA. Much like the drafts from 1984 to 1987, most of the drafts in the 2010 decade have proven that not only is the true franchise center back, it's deeper and more versatile than ever. It started with the 2010 draft, and I'm starting here because I want to give DeMarcus Cousins his flowers. Before the Achilles injury, he had about as complete of an offensive package you'll ever see in a big man. The handle, the passing, the shooting, eventually improving and becoming a league average 3-point shooter, and he would always bruise you on the low block like the centers of old. The drafts from 2012 to 2015 have given some of the game's best players today, from Anthony Davis in 2012, even though he won't accept being a center, and Rudy Gobert in 2013, who has been a defensive monster the last 5 years. Oh, and it would be rude and stupid of me to not mention a gem that was also found in the 2013 draft at the 15th pick, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is the best player in the NBA right now. Giannis's hard work, a growth spurt, and constant improvement has led him to being one of the most dominant forces the game has ever seen, already at the age of 27. While Giannis isn't a traditional center technically, it is his best position, and when the Bucks are in a pinch in a playoff series, they'll have no problem going to lineups with Giannis at center, because that's when the Milwaukee Bucks are at their best. Giannis is one of the most dominant two-way forces, being one of 3 players in NBA history to win the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year award in the same season. The other 2 to achieve that feat are of course Michael Jordan and one of the game's historic titans, Hakeem Olajuwon. The 2014 draft is headlined by Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, the 2 centers that have been tussling for the MVP over the past 2 seasons. Embiid is a throwback big with a mix of modern flavor, a player that is an elite defense by himself, and on offense, a dominating post player, standing at 7 feet, 270 pounds. Embiid also has an offensive skill set that has been molded by watching some of the game's best perimeter players. Embiid started playing basketball in 2011 at the age of 15, and thanks to his superhuman ability of being a fast learner, he went from this to being one of the 5 best players in the NBA. Jokic was more under the radar on draft night in 2014. He was drafted with the 41st pick in the 2nd round. His name flashed up on the big board while a Taco Bell commercial was showing, and he has turned into one of the best offensive players the sport has ever seen. And it only took him 3 seasons or so to take Bill Walton's title as the best passing big man of all time. Yes, it was already that clear to a lot of people. Jokic has also turned up his scoring output the last 2 seasons, which in part has led to him being the only 2nd-round pick in NBA history to win back-to-back MVP awards. Karl Anthony Towns entered the league in 2015 and has become one of the great offensive centers in basketball. Miles Turner was picked in that same draft and has become underrated as a rim-protecting big that can also hit threes at a high clip. The big man is not only back, but they've come back in a variety of shapes, sizes, and skill sets. The pure back-to-the-basket scorers who are also plotting bigs that get torched on defense are what have been erased from the league. Guys like Jahlil Okafor, who was drafted in the same draft as Karl Anthony Towns, were out of the league by age 25. Players like Enes Kanter and Al Jefferson are also in this category. They're no longer in the league because their unitasker skill is not worth putting on the floor if it means they'll be put through the pick-and-roll torture rack on defense. Most of the good players at center who are in the league now are better adapted to today's NBA. DeAndre Ayton, the first pick in the 2018 draft, showed just how important he was to the Phoenix Suns in the 2021 NBA Finals. And though there was some fuckery going on with his contract situation this past summer, that seems to be resolved, or at least somewhat, and Ayton can continue his path to improvement. He has shown touch and a budding offensive game, but ever since finding his niche in the 2021 playoffs, he now has a solid foundation to expand his skills even further and stamp himself even more as a franchise big. Evan Mobley immediately became one of the best defenders in the NBA as a rookie last season. And quite frankly, the Cavaliers have a cheat code with Mobley, who showed repeatedly he can not only guard smaller players and wings on the perimeter, but lock them up. And on top of that, Mobley has shown great offensive flashes. I haven't even mentioned the other good centers currently playing, like Bam Adebayo, Jarrett Allen, Jaren Jackson Jr., Domantas Sabonis, and many more. Size is always going to be an advantage, and now that the center has caught up with the rest of the other positions in evolution, they're starting to crack the short list of the very best players in the NBA. The MVP voting the last 2 seasons is littered with the cream of the crop when it comes to bigs: Giannis, Embiid, and Jokic. The center is officially back, and more skilled bigs will come down the pipeline as soon as the summer of 2023. For a few years now, many have had their eyes on the presumptive #1 pick in the 2023 NBA draft, Victor Wembanyama out of France. Many believe the 2023 draft's top 5 prospects can be franchise-changing players, but Wembanyama is still considered to be the clear-cut best prospect in the draft. A 7'4" center with an NBA record 8-foot wingspan, Wembanyama can do literally every type of offensive skill you can dream of, while also being a menace on the defensive end. There is no way someone of his size should be able to move the way he does on a basketball court. And I have no idea if this is true or not, but there are rumors that he's not done growing. The tankathon that's going to take place among teams this upcoming NBA season is going to be a movie, especially after scouts and executives from those teams and the broader American audience got their first look at Wembanyama in Las Vegas earlier this month. His team, Metropolitans 92 from Paris, played G League Ignite in 2 exhibition games. It was a battle of the top prospects, as Wembanyama's squad faced off against fellow top prospect Scoot Henderson. It was televised on ESPN for all the world to see. Wembanyama's hype was building over the last few years, and I have to say, after seeing 2 full games of him on ESPN2 instead of the usual YouTube highlights and Twitter clips, I'm sold. He is clearly the top pick in the draft and looks to be the next franchise big man of the future, with a futuristic skill set on both ends of the floor. Some of the shots he displayed were fucking ridiculous. He was protecting the rim, guarding guards, all while moving like a 6'5" person. I honestly didn't understand what I was looking at when I was watching Wembanyama. If I'm being completely honest with you, the viewer, I delayed, rewrote, and re-recorded this specific part of the script for this video until after I saw his games against G League Ignite, because with the luxury of having HD TV quality instead of YouTube clips and grainy clips from draft scouts, I thought I was going to witness something I've never seen before. He lived up to the hype, while displaying a competitiveness and a toughness that you would like to see in a future star player. Some teams are primed to bottom out this year at a rate that's never been seen before. The NBA is now filled with talented centers and big men, and Wembanyama is going to add to an already stacked position. And who knows, there could be more centers and big men in future drafts that can bring something unique of their own. What was once a position that looked to be on the brink of extinction is now back and thriving, doing what the franchise bigs of the early days used to do, completely change the dimensions of the basketball court on both ends of the floor. Only this time, it comes with more of a modern flavor.